kids in various capacity. And since 2019, he is an education and pastoral project director working with the Jesuit Refugee Service in Mae Hong Son. Father Joseph, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for your welcome. And I feel very honored today to be able to talk to you, and thank you to the consortium for inviting me and having this opportunity to share some thoughts. A few weeks ago, you had some people representing a human rights perspective, and you also had a perspective from camp administration of humanitarian services. I'd like to focus a little bit on the culture of NGOs and the way in which we operate. And I want to do that starting in the context of where we are today. Pat just mentioned the fact that there's uncertainty in the air, uncertainty about the future for the refugees in the camp. But of course, today also a terrible form of uncertainty in the sense that we see the coronavirus pandemic causing also uncertainty. That's swept through the world silently without observing borders or technology. And I think there are parallels between the uncertainty that the refugee experience along the Thai border with this global uncertainty that we're living with today. So how does this uncertainty, what does it look like? You know, there are different types of discourse that we could think of how to capture these long 30 years. Are they to be considered as decades of despair? Or do we speak about years of yearning for home? Or do we speak about horizons for hope for a new future? In the past, many refugees have been forced to consider third country resettlement as a way forward. And we know that many went to Australia, to Scandinavia, to the US. A few, in spite of Royal Thai government prohibitions, have found a way of settling through local integration here in Thailand. But recently these two options have been tightened up, perhaps we should say even closed off. And it seems like a further long wait until refugees can return home as the final option. I had worked here in Thailand over a decade ago. And before that, as Pat was mentioning, I was working in different parts of Africa. And now that I've returned, I ask myself the question, what has changed? And it seems to me the space for global solutions has grown smaller. The number of IDPs and persons of concern, as you know, in this decade that I was away has doubled. So that from 2010 to 2020, it has reached nearly 80 million people. And the rise of nationalist governments has threatened the way global coalitions were able to examine forced migration and respond to these situations. So perhaps a little bit more pessimistic in terms of numbers and the situations, as we know, in Syria, in the Mediterranean, in Sudan, all seem to have negated any advances that have been made in recent years. But I've come back to humanitarian work here in JRS, Jesuit Refugee Service, partnering with a local CBO responsible for education in the two Karenni camps, the Karenni Education Department, KNED. And that partnership has endured almost as long as there have been Karenni exile refugees here in Thailand. And what are the things that have changed in that decade? Well, global uncertainty. Global uncertainty over how to find ways to come to solutions, and then exacerbated by COVID. But another thing that has changed, I think, and this perhaps is a little bit more positive, what has changed is NGO actions and even UNHCR. Just to give you one example, when I was working in Angola during the Civil War, I met with the UNHCR country rep at the time, who told me that JRS was wasting their time working with IDPs, who at that time numbered over 4 million Angolans displaced locally inside the country. And in the meantime, UNHCR looking after, I think the figure was 3,000 Congolese refugees in Luanda. It was to me, seemed a very dysfunctional organizational culture at that time. And it prevented people from considering working with IDPs as part of their mandate. And yet now you see that UNHCR can speak of, in their document just recently, the end of last year, engagement situations of internal displacement. And they've promised, as UNHCR, to be more decisive, predictable, and effective in situations of internal displacement, delivering a protection and solutions-driven response. It may be belated, but at least it's an acknowledgement of the need for humility and responsiveness. As you know, Professor Harold Bond, the late Professor Harold Bond, who was the magnificent defender for refugee rights as an integral part of a struggle for human rights, she asked what was the reasons for which humanitarian organizations would indulge with their workers in inhumane behavior. What made them become inhuman? And she asks the question rhetorically, was it lack of training by staff? Was it unequal power relations? Was it scarce resources? Or was it a dysfunctional culture? And any of these, and all of them collectively together, result in humanitarian workers becoming defensive, higher stress levels. They become detached from the problems and engage in transference. We've come some way since then, and I think milestones like the Sphere Standards for humanitarian action, and in education we have INEE has helped produce guidelines. But I still think we have more to do as NGOs to correct the balance that humanitarian aid causes, or lack of balance that humanitarian aid causes through unequal power relations. I believe that a value that JRS strives to bring is that of accompaniment. By that I mean when refugees typically arrive in a host country, they come hungry, they come without very much, if anything, without an identity. But they don't go through all that trauma just to be given clothes or food. They come to recover something of their lost identity, and they come to be heard as individuals, to be listened to. So they need respect, and they need to be heard and understood. Of course, I saw that very often in African refugee situations. It was cross-border neighbours who would often first offer care and support to refugees that were fleeing persecution. And for a significant percentage of the world's refugees and IDPs, it's those host communities, usually poor and without resources, who offer what help they can to their brothers and sisters. Poor countries in Africa are very often the hosts for refugees and more willing than their counterparts who are well-off hosts in the first world to do so. And I'm sure the situation is much the same in Asia. It's this reality that JRS hopes to respond to with an attitude and a value of respectful listening. We have supported Karenni educational activities for 3 decades. We believe the support that we give has to be there when refugees need it. We believe our presence can help internationalize in some small way the situation at the border, where otherwise it would be forgotten or the world would ignore. We believe it's a form of protection to be willing to be present and respect others in partnership. It also, I think, helps mitigate the dangers of creating extremism or fundamentalism or nationalism. And that is because we also believe that JRS should be part of both sides of the border. So in a conflict situation, I mean, like Vietnam, Angola, Sudan, Colombia, Rwanda, and even in Myanmar, we recognize the difficulty of working on both sides, but we believe it's important for maintaining cross-border information flows, and it promotes greater self-awareness, self-criticism, and capacity for analysis. And prejudices that we have are more likely to be identified and challenged for what they are in such situations. We partner KNED because we believe education is at the heart of the humanitarian response. And it does so by promoting self-worth, mutual respect, and reinforcing individual as well as community identity. It unlocks a wider horizon for children who are the foundations of a new society that we hope and pray will be more just, more fair, and more caring than the one that forced their parents or grandparents into exile in the first place. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to our discussions together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Joe, for your sharing, which make us kind of have more understanding about what JRS is focusing on, and also the important, and not only the refugee, that important, and also the host community, and as well as the humanitarian worker, which all of these parties face kind of stress and also the difficulties. And the most important things that you really focus on the value of respect others in partnership and to listening them, which is kind of a core of our our organization, that when we work with the refugee, we should hear from them, we should listen to them, right? Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Mr. Hampson Payon Sakdapat. He is a senior field coordinator at Save the Children Thailand based in Mysore. And Hampson has vast experience working for several international NGOs, including Humanity and Inclusion, Right to Play, International Organization for Migration, the Border Consortium, and Diakonia Thailand. And Mr. Hampson will focus more on the situation of the refugee children in the all night camps. Mr. Hampson, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, Kun Pat, for the introduction. I'm not sure you can hear me well. Yeah, so thank again for the invitation to be part of today's discussion. Yes, on behalf of Save the Children Thailand, I will mainly speak on the support on education for refugee students in refugee camps, and also for education transition after the student return. Yeah. Save the Children have been active in providing education for refugee students in 7 camps since 2013 in collaboration with other education stakeholders that also include GIS, ADRA, CIE, and other local organizations, including education authority, including current refugee education entity, yeah, and currently education department. Yeah. We think that it's important to provide ownership by empowering and strengthening local education entity which supervise the education in refugee camp. Yeah, so I think that is crucial for Save the Children to create ownership for local organizations for sustainability purpose. Yeah. And Save the Children support children education in refugee camp is we respond to sustainable development goal number 4, which is about inclusive education with a uniform agenda that leave no one behind. And access to education is for fundamental human rights, and also education is also enabling rights that lead to other rights. So we say like through education, other rights are realized and can be achieved, such as gender equality and the eradication of poverty. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we work together with other organizations through the project called Basic Education Support Toward Transition and Preparing for Reintegration through Participative Solutions, or shorter known as BASE-PREP project. The project aims to maintain quality basic education in refugee camps and to support children, teachers, and parents for increased knowledge and skill to support for successful transition and reintegration when they return one day, voluntarily return one day in origin country, or even integrate in a destination country as well. Yeah. And the project also aims to increase linkages, enhance synergies, collaboration between local actors on both sides of the border to support positive experience of the return, particularly related to education transition. As we know that the refugee camps exist for more than 30 years, so the majority of the students in refugee camp were born in refugee camp in Thailand side. Yeah. Through the project, we were able to support around 20,000 students access to education, and we also support around 1,000 teachers with professional development and also stipend. Yeah. The challenge is that even though we provide the education opportunity for the student to access to education, but it is quite challenging due to adequate resources, the limited budget. So it's a challenge for providing quality education, such as learning materials and to train qualified teachers. And also, when we look at the sustainability, there's there is no concrete recognition of the ethnic education at this moment. So this is also a challenge, and the education stakeholders should work on to have the education system in camp recognized, so that when the students they return to Myanmar, they can accept it or access to further education inside Myanmar. And also the teachers should also be recognized, so that when they leave the camp and can teach in a school inside Myanmar as well. Yeah. Another challenge, especially in the emergency context, for example, the COVID-19, when it happens, the adaptation of the education is quite challenging because of the remote area, and not like in most of, like, for example, the Thai school, they can access to online learning, but the refugee camps had to depend on, like, manual. So yeah, so providing education in refugee camps is quite challenging. But the important thing is that we need to empower education local organizations for management of their own system in refugee camp. Yeah. So I like to highlight that the children, regardless of their status, should be ensured that they access to education. The condition of having asking for, for example, like the legal status or document should be balanced. I mean, when we realize that education it's a fundamental right for the children, so then other requirements should be less, required, so that they can access to education. Yeah. And also, we should ensure that refugee students are provided with their academic transcripts, school transfer letters as evidence for their learning achievements, to support enrollment upon their return. So it can be served as the evidence that they finished the education at refugee camp, and also education stakeholders inside origin country, say like Myanmar, to recognize also the education at refugee camp, so to support the small transition. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it from me. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Khun Khomsan, for sharing your experience, and also what is very important for the student, for the children to have kind of knowledge and skill for their future, no matter they will kind of voluntarily return or they will stay here or wherever they go. And when you said it's around that you support around 20,000 students access to education, this is important. That it's kind of 40%, right, of the total population in the whole 9 camps, which is around 80,000. So this is kind of a huge work, but it's also still have a lot of challenging as a kind of, maybe you have the adequate resource and the legal status there to access to the education, which might, all these challenges might put more difficulties for the children to access to education. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Naukyapo. She is a Karen woman, was born on the Thai-Myanmar border and became a refugee at the age of 11. She is General Secretary of the Karen Women Organization, an organization with over 70,000 members. And Ngos also received various awards, both national and international. So today she will talk about the current situation in the refugee camps. And today we are very lucky because Ngos she's in Mesariang, which today the electricity is good and the connection is good. Ngos, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here in this panel. My name is Ngos. I am General Secretary of the Korean Women's Organization. I was born in 1981 near the Thai-Burma border when the Burma Army launched its clearance operations in my homeland against ethnic people. At that time, the Burma Army was still implementing what they call the four cuts policy, targeting civilians, which had started in 1970s. And their operation destroyed more than 3,500 villages in Southeast Burma and forced thousands of villagers to flee to the border. This includes my parents. And then I became a refugee at the age of 11 and grew up in the refugee camps where I finished my high school there. So I know firsthand how difficult it is to be poor in the camps without enough clothes, no nutrition food to eat, not having legal identity, not able to go outside or have the right to freedom of movement. As you all know that the refugee camps along the Thai-Burma border are different from those in other parts of the world. The camps are under the official administration of Thai government authorities. However, on a daily basis, we run our own affairs and provide services by ourselves with support from donors outside and NGOs. The camp's leaders, teachers, medics, social workers are all refugees. Over the past 30 to 40 years, refugees have found safety in the camps from the persecution we suffer in Burma. There has been enough basic service available for refugees to live with dignity despite many restrictions. Refugees will also get along well with the Thai villagers around us. But no one wants to live in the closed camps, particularly the children and young people. Refugees always hope that they will be able to return home safely or find a place where they can live just like other human beings, be welcomed and enjoy their human rights. No refugees thinks that they will be living in the refugee camps for 10 years, let alone 30 years. So if you look at, according to the international standards, there are three what we call the durable solutions for the refugees. Number one is returning home. Number two, integration within the country that they have taken refuge. And number three is resettlement to the third country. The resettlement option is not closed for refugees on this border. It started in 2005 under UNHCR's leadership, coordinating with about 10 countries who opened up their borders and took in refugees from this border. The biggest numbers went to the USA and smaller numbers to Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, and European Union countries, and Scandinavian countries. Although many refugees chose to resettle, we still have around 80 or 90,000 people remain in the camps, and the resettlement program is not closed. And in 2012, the Korean National Union, they signed the bilateral preliminary ceasefire agreement with the military turned civilian government in Burma. And then in 2015, Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD party won the elections in Burma, and the KNU and also many other ethnic organizations signed up to a national ceasefire agreement and agreed to take part in the peace process. Donors, international governments, NGOs, they saw these steps as a progress towards an improved situation for everyone in Burma. Refugees themselves also felt hope for a better life. However, it has been 7 years now, but the situation and condition on the ground in Burma, where refugees are coming from, has not been improved, and the peace process has installed. There is still a lot of Burmese military activity against ethnic people in our homeland. There is no discussion nor effort being made to ensure safe conditions for refugees to return. In 2017, UNHCR opened up their voluntary repatriation centers, VRC, in all refugee camps, hoping to encourage refugees to return to Burma. However, about 1,000 refugees have returned through UNHCR, and then this low number clearly shows that refugees do not feel safe to go home yet. On the other hand, in the ethnic areas in Burma, it's very militarized by the Burma army, who continue every day to build up their soldier camps, send more troops, ammunition, build new roads to transport their supplies. And the Burma army breaks their ceasefire agreements every day, but the Burmese government nor international communities do nothing. The fighting continues. In the last 7 years, in the current area alone, there were more than 100 clashes between Burma Army and the Karen National Liberation Army, and landmines are still everywhere. So even the internally displaced people, they cannot go back to their own villages yet. So, but in the meantime, since 2012, donors have cut a lot of support to refugee camps. The further cut in the refugee camps have greatly reduced the basic services and food. For example, now adults receives an average about 200 baht to buy food for 1 month per person. Minimum international standards are not even met anymore. The cuts in food and services make life extremely difficult, and we feel like we are being forced out to return to Burma. People in the camps are now living in a great difficulties, and it's getting worse day by day. There is more depression, and also feeling of hopelessness are causing increase in drugs and alcohol abuse. There is more violence against women and children. Less funding also means more children drop out of the schools, less teachers are employed, and even less study supplies are provided. Our capacity to govern our communities has been diminished by the cutting of the resources. There are not enough community police to enforce simple camp rules to provide protection to women and children. Less funding also means not enough medics in the clinics, not enough medicines, and almost no referrals to the Thai hospitals. The cut to services and ratio has created a need to earn income. So parents and older siblings are leaving the young children at home unaccompanied. While they go outside, they're looking for the work. And then as unregistered migrant workers in Thailand, they are exploited, arrested, and abused. This is the situation across all the refugee camps. So if you look at 2 of the 3 durable solutions for the refugees along this border have been explored. The resettlement is closed down, and return to our homeland is still too dangerous. So no one wants to be a refugee forever. We want to stand up on our own feet. We don't want to depend on donations forever. We would like to see the 3rd durable solution for refugees being given a chance. That is integration. Refugees are capable of working and accomplishing great things, if only we are given the opportunities. We think that it is in the best interest of the Thailand also to open up opportunities for refugees to work outside of the refugee camps, to allow them to earn an income and to take care of their families' needs themselves. Refugees also, they should have access to Thai education, healthcare, just like everyone else in Thailand. So for us, our recommendation is that the refugees committee, camp committee, civil society organizations should be supported to do their work in the refugee camps, and the refugees should receive at least minimum international standard of food, health, and basic educations until they are able to fully independent and all their rights are respected. And also, we would like the Royal Thai government to provide temporary legal documents to refugees so they can legally work outside of the refugee camps and have access to Thai health and education services. This would be possible with financial support and technical assistance from international donors. And programs offered by civil society also should continue, and donors should be responding quickly to meet the new needs, such as providing emergency food ration and also hygiene kits, as well as other basic needs. And finally, donors should commit to provide adequate support to meet basic needs until such time that it's genuinely safe for the refugees and IDPs to return home. The refugees themselves, they must feel that it is safe to return, and they must do so voluntarily. But a cut should not be used to try to incentivize people to return before it is safe for them to do so. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yapo, for your sharing and of course the 3 durable solution. Which one is durable? So it is very important that have to think about this, because the resettlement process is already closed down and return home is so risky. And the last one, integration, might be the way out. We don't know. It depends on the Thai government and depend on the 2 countries on that. And of course, due to the limited resource from migration cut, and of course, this one is make the life of the refugees in the camp is more pressure. And yeah, of course, as you say already that people have to find a way until they can stay on their own foot on feet, right? To make the life is better. Okay, thank you so much. And next we can hear from Hayso. Hayso became a refugee in Thailand due to civil war in Myanmar. Currently, he serves as education and livelihood coordinator at current refugee committee. He is also an executive director at current Peace Support Network, and he is also a co-founder and country representative of Asia Pacific Network of Refugee. Hayso, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Firstly, I want to thank IMPRED for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Refugees Committee. Refugees living in 7 refugee camps along the Thailand-Burma border. As we all know, the first exodus of refugees from Burma happened in early 1970s, where thousands of refugees, mainly Korean ethnic, crossed the border to Thailand due to civil war in Burma. And the formations of the Korean Refugees Committee, KRC, did a response to refugee crisis in early 1980s. Thanks to the Royal Thai government for accepting and accommodated refugees from Burma despite being a non-signatory of 1951 Refugees Conventions. Though it is known as temporary shelters, refugee camp has been existing for more than 3 decades now. Thanks to NGO, UNHCR, Royal Thai government, individuals for your continuous support. And there are more than 100,000 refugees have now resettled to 30 different countries with the permissions from Royal Thai government through UNHCR during the last 50 years. I would not have imagined if there were no such opportunity granted to refugees, some of whom have never spent more of their life and have spent more of their life in refugee camps. And currently there are still more than 70,000, as our colleagues have mentioned, still living in 7 current refugee camps with no design of returning to their country of origin or being able to resettle to third country since it has now closed. And now more than half of international NGOs have led their service in the last 8 to 9 years. And this creates much concern and worries for refugees who still remain in the camps. And refugee camps in Thailand become a sanctuary for many refugees, especially who were born and grown up here. Education, livelihood, health service are important factors besides camp management support program, which actually play an important role in managing camp affairs. And education opportunity is restricted by the fact that refugees are not entitled to basic outside the camp, to basic right outside the camp. Support for post-higher secondary education has stopped, and nursery program has tremendously affected due to the inadequate funding. School play an important role, important part in shaping the future of refugee, especially in refugee camps. Without continuous support, it will affect not only the future of children, but will also greatly affect the harmony of the camp environment. I also would like to highlight some social problems that are happening in refugee camp. And social problems in refugee camp are especially common. And the feeling of having no hope is a common expression by refugee. Despite services still remain. A durable solution to social problem doesn't depend only service delivery, but also finding means to solve the structural and social stratification so that the gap for human desire and freedom will be narrowed down, whereby creative space where their lives could be expressed in a broader social, political, and economic context. I would like to urge the international organizations, government or non-government, international agency to help find the positive step in solving refugee problems and restore their future. We have to believe that refugees are not a burden, but they can be solution to society provided they are given space equally. Indeed, they can, provided they are being given a chance where their basic rights are fully recognized. And I would like to highlight this again because this is important, and we know that refugees living in the camps need our support, need our help, and they need hope. And that's why we would like to continue to ask for your support. And we would like to also ask for better coordinations between different agencies and NGO, and to also look for a way where refugees can build their future sustainably. So I would like to conclude with this, and thank you very much for your kind attentions.
Thank you so much, Hayso. It is kind of stay in the camp. Of course, it's very, very difficult. And as you said that a lot of assistance has been cut. And of course, in this situation, the refugee in the camp still need this kind of support from various parties, let's say, particularly from the NGO, international or local NGO, to really to make the life of refugee kind of in a sustainable way, to see that refugee is not a burden. If they give a chance, right? If they give a chance to work, to have the basic right, and with that one, it will make them stronger and can help themselves. We have certain questions with us here. Let me check. Oh, from the participant, this question is go to you, Nokanyopo. The question is that many of what you are relating is very similar to the fate of the Rohingya, such as the slow or non-existent repatriation process, the extended stay in IDP camps, and the awful housing conditions. How likely will both groups be able to work together to try and achieve the solution of returning home?
Yes, of course, we are also deep concerned about the Rohingya refugees. They live in the western part of Burma, in Bangladesh, and we know that their condition is overcrowded, and also they face a lot of challenges. I think from Korean Women's Organization, because a lot of refugees also, they're not able to leave the camps, right? Refugees in Thailand also not able to leave the camp. So what we could do is we show our solidarity supports, to them. And also we could do like an advocacy together at the international levels, so that when, international donors are supporting to Burma, they support all the refugees who are in need from the Bangladesh border, but also in the Thai-Burma border. The issue is that because Thai-Burma border, the refugees has been existing for more than 30 years. So then some of the donors, they couldn't, they feel like they have committed for a long time already. And so some of the donors have pulled out their support. And we also know that in Bangladesh, there's so much needs. And so from our organizations, when we work on the refugees issues, we look at from the human rights perspective, and of course we need to support each other whenever possible. And And right now, because of the restrictions that we have that imposed to the refugees, we're not able to do exchange activities or do these kind of things, but we can show our solidarity support. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Other question, I think it's go to anyone here. So the question is, how likely will the refugee be able to vote in the coming election? And what kind of hope do you have post-elections in November? Yeah, so that.
Should I answer first?
Yeah. Any one of you, maybe you can go first, and others, if you want to add, yeah, please do so.
So for me, because the election is also, the refugees also cannot participate in these coming elections. And in the last election, refugees themselves hope that when the civilian government came into power, there will be, changes and opportunities for them to return home. There might be like the government will work on safe conditions, for the refugees to be able to return home. But I think this was not the case. So in the coming elections, I think we would like to see the civilian governments that are also caring for their population, particularly the refugees and IDPs, and working to create conditions, why refugees cannot return home. That's because of the conflicts ongoing, because the Burma army continue, active and expanding, and because there are still landmines, and because there is no livelihood, and because there is no services available for the refugees. So we hope that since refugees are not able, to participate, there's only hope that the governments will also take into consideration refugees issue. Yeah, that would be our perspective for the coming election.
Any other want to answer this question? Our speakers? Hayso, do you want to respond?
I think personally, I don't think refugee can directly involve in this upcoming elections in Burma and Myanmar. However, as our colleague mentions, I think they do hope that any elections would bring some sort of changes. And I think in many refugees, they have been so frustrated that they don't really see a lot of improvement or no improvement at all during the last elections. And with actually a lot of promise from the government that they would bring changes, but they feel that the refugee issue has not been prioritized and has not been thought as an important issue, and that's why there are still a lot of conflict and in the place where they come from. And I think now it is important. I think that the government have to reconsider, whoever government came to power, that the refugee issues need to be addressed seriously, or otherwise I think it will continue to remain as it is, and it will only create frustrations for the refugee who remain outside of the country.
Thank you. We have some more questions. This one is related to the Rohingya. The question is, what is the future of Rohingya in IDC in Thailand? I'm not sure that whether any one of you can answer this one. I mean, the future of Rohingya in the immigration detention center in Thailand. So who would like to answer this question?
I think hard for us to answer this question. I think someone who work on, like maybe yourself, April, and then can answer.
Yeah, so I think this one and it has a kind of different forum. With actually this we have already in the last 2 weeks about Rohingya issue. So yeah, for those who ask this question, we might come back to you again. We have a team to answer your question. Yep. Let's go to the question. They say they ask, the question is that they want to know the reason. What is the reason if the refugee kind of make decision to return home? So what will make them make this decision to return home?
I can answer first. For me, when you talk to the refugees, whether they wanted to return or not, I think the first thing is the safety for them. If they feel safe, to go back to the place where their parents are coming from, or they're originally coming from. As many people mentioned here, a lot of refugees also were born in Thailand. So it's very even hard to call home back to Burma. But anyway, where their parents coming from, we consider as our home. But the place where we're coming from, safety, the safety is the first priority. And then, of course, the livelihood and access to services, like when you go back, you need to be able to stand up by yourself. Nobody will want to support you forever. So you need to be able to find job, to survive, to feed your family. So that would be the livelihood opportunities. And of course, access to services such as education and healthcare and other social services. So if these conditions are ready in Burma, I'm sure refugees, lots of refugees, not everyone can return, maybe because of like a security reason or many reasons, but a lot of refugees also would go back home. But because of the conditions not there and there is no discussion to create, this situation. So safety, security, livelihood, access to social service, education, health, yeah, that would be the main things.
Anyone want to respond to this question? Any speakers?
Well, if I could just come in.
Please, Pastoral.
I mean, normally the conditions for return depend on a tripartite agreement between the host country, the receiving country, and UNHCR. And UNHCR representing the international community's kind of assessment that there is safety and security, as has just been said, and that to some extent rights can be respected and guaranteed, livelihoods are possible. And that's so that creates the conditions under which that takes place. But I would like also to stress, and it was touched on earlier in our debate, we need to rethink a little bit the prospects for integration. I know it's a sensitive subject, and the Royal Thai government looks at it, first of all, from a question of security from their own assessment. But I think what I don't hear very often are arguments that refugee communities can be centres of economic development. I think refugees bring a certain dimension to a local economy, and we should be able to promote integration based on economic realities. Refugees in a place can create more wealth for more people. Of course, we have to balance that with protecting the rights of refugees, because local host communities can both be helpful, but they can also sometimes, in some ways, be exploitative, because they look on refugees as almost free labor. So I think the conditions under which, livelihood support are offered to refugees are really based on, for example, Thai law, minimum wages. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And if that were done, the economic models should show that by opening up refugee possibilities within a host community, you're increasing development and economic activities, not just for refugees, but for locals themselves.
Anyone want to respond to this question more? No? No? Yeah? It's fine? Okay. Okay, we have another question. The question is, can refugee, the refugee student, can they come out of the camp to attend the school outside the camp? And the question is, they want to know whether the refugee student can come out from the camp to study outside in a local school. You can answer this.
I think Hayso can answer that.
Legally, no refugee are allowed to go outside the camp. Basically, they cannot. Officially, they cannot. And of course, through the local management, refugee children were also given some opportunity to go out and study in Thai school outside the camp or nearby the camp. And this is only arranged through the local management and understanding. And generally, or to say legally, from legal perspective, they are not allowed to go out, or whether they are student or refugee themselves. Yes.
Okay. The question related to this, that okay, this has to under the arrangement, and like this, the question is, I think this one is related to Save the Children. They say that like this, if the local arrangement and as Save the Children support the education also, how Save the Children can play a role in this one. I think this one is go to Kun Khomsan, right? Kun Khomsan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say it's a tricky question, but when we look at, as I mentioned before, that access to education, it's a basic fundamental right. So I think relevant stakeholders, including Thai governments and local organizations, should find a way how we can support the students choose their education path. Either they see opportunity to study outside refugee camp. This should be encouraged to do so. But we also have to consider in the aspect of the security. I would say providing education for people regardless of their status can also create peers in the society, and I would say there should be less condition in order to to have student or person to access to education. I think but of course that this have to be discussed in a wider networks, including maybe the representative also from Thai government and other the national organization, local NGO, and the rights holder themselves on this. But to me, I think the opportunity should be open for the student to access to education, which it is a basic human right. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We still have another question. Moment. So the question, they asked that how much has the donation dropped for the camp-based refugee? Can you hear?
I think it's very hard to say how much like that, but I can say from the perspective of the refugees who are receiving services, like when I was in refugee camps up until I finished my high school, and I think before the resettlement we used to get like 50 kilo of rice, kilogram of rice, and also like yellow beans, cooking oil, so this kind of things. But how much is dropped, I don't know. But right now, if you look in the refugee camps, an average person is about 200 baht per month per person, you know, to buy. This is for the food, you know. And when you talk about food, it's not just the rice, but it's also, you know, things that you need to cook, you know, cooking oil, or, you know, other vegetables, meat, or whatever. So yeah, so this is what the amount of how does it funding cuts that have impact to the refugees on the ground. And I think the same to the education. I think funding also decreases to the refugees to the education. That's why you see also classroom combined, or some of the school, the primary school are consolidated like that. And the same with medical surveys. There's less medics, less medical supplies, and also like a very little referral to the Thai hospital we compare in the past. So we don't know how much it's dropped in dollars or in baht, but we can see in the refugee camps the effect it has on the daily life of the refugees.
Anyone want to respond to this?
I think there's another dynamic in play. I think it's true that funds have been dropping as the international community gets less interested and involved in a solution to the refugees on the Thai-Myanmar border. But of course, what's happened? So funds have definitely been dropping over the years. COVID-19 has produced an extraordinary new situation. It has devastated economies everywhere. So it means, in one way, we can look to bigger drops in international NGO support. But I have to say that the support that's been offered in the last 3 months for our COVID-19 preparedness activities has been pretty extraordinary, and it's allowed much of the work that we think is necessary to be done under very difficult circumstances and at short notice, and with new appeals, because this has only happened over the last few months. So I think that situation, you know, the general situation would make you a bit pessimistic, but then some of the responses in recent months have shown great generosity to help us cope with COVID-19.
Thank you for your response. And yeah, related to that, the kind of the support, continue to support to the refugee in the camp. So this is my own interest to ask this question. How to advocate for the donors to continue to support the refugee camps, as you know that now is kind of the refugee camp is still face difficulties, right? And a lot of funding is dropped. So how can we help to advocate for the donor to continue their support? Yeah.
Yes, I think the main reasons why the funding has been cut probably for the last 5 years, and for the refugee services in Thailand is due to the fact that the conditions in Burma has started changes, which led to the interpretation that the refugee should be ready to go home. The services has to be reduced due to the needs of the others, and this has actually created worries, as I mentioned earlier. And so I think there is a push factor as well as a pull factor. I think, and the situation in Burma has actually create the conditions and for the donor see that we have to change their policy toward the humanitarian assistance, and that's what there has be some donor has left and moved their project or their support in Burma side, and this is very difficult for the refugee who still remain in the camp because they see that in another way, and it is not really a situation when they thought is conducive, and they still thought that it is not because they know that at the ground level there are still a lot of problem, uh, technical problem and practical problem which are not realized by the international donor. So we would like to bring this message that the conditions or situations in Burma has uh, uh, actually many things has probably not so many things has changes. So I think I would like to make this as also an appeal to international donor to look at a real situation in the ground, whether especially in the southeast of Myanmar or is in the western part in Rakhine state, that the refugee will continue to need support and also to have an adequate time so that they are fully ready and decide can make better decisions, not only in the extent of reductions of funding and pushing them to go back. So I think they need to be given time to make decisions. At the same time, continuous support have to be received as they prepare themselves for their futures.
I would like to add that like we know that there is humanitarian crisis everywhere in other parts of the world, and donors need to respond to those crises. But I think the refugees, as I mentioned in my presentation, no one wants to be a refugee forever. We want to be able to stand up on our own feet and feed our families. So until we are not able to do it, it is everyone as a human being our responsible, to help each other. And if we are from countries that are better off, we need to also support the refugees, and so that the refugees can live in a dignity. Okay, yes, I think refugees, we understand that there is so many crisis competition, and we do not ask for luxury life or something, very basic needs, just to survive, also with the dignity. In the meantime, working towards durable solutions. Until we are able to find durable solutions, then we still have to depend, refugees still have to depend on international support, international donors and government support. So I think we need to look at all approaches, and the short term, continue to support so that refugees have a basic need and they can live with dignity, but also working on toward durable solutions. As I mentioned already, like the resettlements already closed, return is still very hard for many refugees. Some people that can return, okay, they can return, we need to support them, but those who are still here, what are the other possible ways, to support them? So if donor is reducing support, they are able to stand up and also support themselves. So that would be, my advocacy to the donors, that of course refugees do not want to depend just only for outside donors. We want to be able to stand up our feet, and we could do it if we are given opportunity.
Yeah, that is kind of we can hear the kind of direct voices from the refugee themselves. And Father So and Kun Khomsan, as you work for the organization, what will be your kind of advocacy strategy? Because as NGO, you have to kind of have direct contact with the donor. So how should you kind of process this to advocate that, okay, how the donor should continue to support to the refugee in the camp? Yeah.
Well, I think there's two messages. One is the value of education for anybody, and refugee children on the border, on the Thai-Myanmar border, have that right to education. So I think, you know, there's an appeal to a basic human right. The second appeal would be to try and make NGOs appreciate that protracted refugee situations are much more difficult to deal with, cause more problems, and in the end have to be solved one way or another, but become much more expensive. So it's a very pragmatic argument to say, if you can help educate children now, you're actually providing motivation for this refugee problem to be solved. 30 years longer is too long. Any refugee encampment is too long. So an appeal that tries to show that actually taking the bull by the horns and trying to approach this problem to come up with solutions is better than leaving the situation or turning away. That's what I would say.
Maybe I'd like to add a little bit on to this question. I think while we promoting voluntary return for refugees to choose the future, either to stay integrate in Thailand, return into Myanmar, or stay still in a refugee camp. I think donor institution should make sure that you know, the provision of the services in the refugee camp should be up on the minimum standard. I think this is a crucial for humanitarian work, that when we provide the you know, the services, and it should be up to minimum standard. Take an example, like the support to education. I think we need to make sure, for example, the school construction, we need to make sure that the school environment is safe enough for the student to study, not having seeing the construction collapse or something like that. Yeah, so that's harmful for the children. So yeah, so I'd like to reiterate on the provision should be, you know, at least minimum standard. Thank you.
Thank you so much all for your response to this question. Okay, so we have before we end today's webinar, so we have a last question for each panelist to provide your thought. The question is here. The refugee camps in Thailand has existed for more than 30 years, and the refugees have been facing uncertainty. What do you think is the exit for this situation, or what should be a future direction? Khun Hayso.
Thank you very much. This is very good questions and important questions, I think, for the refugee. And I would like to express my opinion that the future of the refugee here in Thailand need a lot of attention internationally and nationally. And I know that there has been a long time support for the refugee by international NGO and UNHCR and Royal Thai government. And that has been an impressive situations for the refugee where they have received their basic needs, and in terms of their physical need, education, and the livelihood. And yet we know that there are still many challenges for many refugees who still remain in the camp, who cannot be resettled, who cannot return to their country of origin. And to my opinion, this need a coordinated effort by the international agency, such as UNHCR and international NGO, and most importantly, I think for Royal Thai government to have to come up with a suitable solution or sustainable solution where the refugee can build their future, whether it could be in their country of origin, or it could be to a third country, or could be an integration program in Thailand. And I say this because we have to understand the context of the refugee and those who come and live in the refugee camp and who became refugees for a long time and through different generations. And we have to understand their need, we have to understand their expectations. And I think if we can do that, we'll be able to sort of what they really want to be and to see their future one day. And so I think this is important that we, especially for international NGO to come up with a more strategy where they can create durable solutions for refugee, and at the same time for international agencies such as UNHCR to have to advocate for refugee who don't really want to go back and have decided to choose their life in different countries or in the country where they are living. And I think it's more importantly for the Royal Thai government to also see the really needs of the refugee who has been living for many, many years, that they could be people where they can contribute to the society and support the community. And so I think this need a coordinated policy where I think someday we hope that the refugee life here could be improved, or at least and build their future wherever they are. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Nyopo?
For me, I think we need to, it's a process and we need to working on all at the same time. We should have a medium, long-term and also short-term and medium, like short, medium and long-term. What I'm saying is that right now in the refugee camps, the refugees' education is not, or qualification is not recognized by any countries besides the refugees themselves and the Korean, or the Korean administration. So we need a recognition of the refugees' education and qualifications, either from the Burmese government or the Thai government. That would be, one of the important things to do. So if there is opportunities for them to either integrate within Thailand or go back, they could use, they can find job and they can use their education qualification to find a job. And then, as I mentioned in my presentation already, we really need to look for the third river solution, which is integration, or at least to the Thai government to provide a temporarily legal document or allow the refugees to have a right to freedom of movement so that they could go outside and work and support their families' needs. Because right now, with this amount of support that they received, it's not enough to support their families, and they have to leave the camp, and they're leaving the camp looking for a job anyways, and they face a lot of problems. Like when you're leaving the camps, then you don't have a legal identity, you become not legal migrant workers, and you're being exploited and abused and arrested. So we think that it is in the Thai government's interest to provide refugees with some sort of document so that they could work legally outside, earn to support their families, and of course also have access to the Thai educations and healthcare just like everyone else. And we think that is not a burden, like not so big burden for the Royal Thai government, because we know that Thai government also provided, the migrant workers with the legal work permits for the migrant workers that coming from Thailand to millions of migrant workers. And for this population of the refugees, we think if they open up the opportunities, they would be able to also provide opportunity to the refugees to earn income and to live in the dignities and stand by their own self, their own feet, and support their family.
Thank you. Khun Khomsan.
Thank you for the question. I will agree with colleagues on this. I think require strong collaboration from Thai government and Myanmar government for the support of refugees to choose their future, either to reintegrate or return to Myanmar. I think we might need to look at the situation inside Myanmar at this moment. If situation is allow for refugee to return at this moment, especially on the security, livelihood opportunities, and yeah. So I think the land will be the problem. I think most of the refugees maybe not access to land, which can, a good access for them, to build up their life. But without land and livelihood opportunity, that will be very difficult for them to go back at this moment. So I think at this moment, what we can do is a preparation for, voluntary return, and let refugees choose their own future. If they feel that they safe enough to return, and then it should be like informed decision. Yeah. I just maybe talk a little bit on the education. So as other colleagues mentioned, the education system in refugee camp should be recognized by the education stakeholder, including Myanmar government, so that the student can further or continue their study either in Myanmar government school and also in the ethnic education schools. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Joe.
Thank you. Well, I obviously agree with all the comments that my colleagues have made. Whilst we appreciate what the Royal Thai government has done over the years in hosting refugees, and whilst we also acknowledge that security is an issue that needs to be addressed, at the same time, I think it's possible to see ways in which the boundaries for opening up possibilities for integration are widened a bit. And as was just said, if those boundaries can be opened a little bit for migrant workers, I think in the same way they can be opened for refugee children, for example, for education. But I think in the end, it's a question for the refugees themselves to be able to make a free and informed choice as to whether they are able and want to go back to Myanmar in safety and security, or whether they want to have some form of integration. And we would, like to make it possible that the Thai government opens that dialogue and that field of possibilities for education and for work, and ultimately for identification. Thank you.
Thank you so much for our panelists for sharing your experience. And we hope that all this information will help the audience to have better understanding about the camp refugee in Thailand. And this is our last session of the month-long webinar organized by the Coalition for the refugee and stateless person, and today we have less difficulty in the technical things. And yeah, so we will keep your posts if we have future event. So just please follow our Facebook, and yeah, thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye.